What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. So today we're doing our top 30. A little late, I know. Holidays got a bit hectic, which of course I hope you all had happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Welcome to 2026. But it's better to get it out late than never. So we're gonna do the top 30. We're gonna talk about my all-time list for the series. So this isn't just like, of the upcoming year or kind of just current time. This is all the characters that have been introduced. We're gonna rank them top 30 of all time. Now I'm going to exclude 3 characters, Emu, Joy Boy, and Davy Jones, just because they're kind of anomalies as far as the world goes. There are a few more anomalies, but not as major as these 3, so we're just not going to include them for the sake of ease in making the list. And we're going to go by 5s. We're going to talk about 5 at a time until we get to the top. So let's jump in with 30 to 26. At 30, we have Katakuri, 29, Sabo, 28, Beckman, 27, Green Bull, 26, Fujitora. Now I'm looking at these as relative power levels. I would say they're probably somewhat interchangeable between some of them. I think there are a few discrepancies because Beckman is a bit of an unknown. He's kind of just riding off of portrayal, whereas the other characters do have some noted feats. Now for this section, I think they're all relatively similar in power levels. I think that the person with the weakest portrayal here is probably Green Bull as far as like on-screen feats. The person with the least amount of feats is technically Beckman, but he has better portrayal as far as the story goes. We've seen Kat, we've seen Sabo, we've seen Fujitora. They have really solid feats. The only reason that Kat kind of sits at 30 and not a little bit higher is because the admirals are trained to fight people like commanders. They're not just one-offs. They know how to fight these people. We've seen Fujitora and Sabo clash, and we've seen how that kind of works out. And these characters are pretty relative, so it's not like, they're leaps and bounds above the others. I think Katakuri is still slept on because he has some of the most versatile powers, and his kit is just full. He has all 3 forms of hockey. He has Future Sight, he has Conquerors, he has Advanced Armament. He is a special paramecia. Like this dude just has everything. Literally everything. And I think the only issue is that he went up against the MC. When you pit him against just about any other character, he's gonna have a good showing. Like, he just has too much in his kit. But I do think the other characters speak for themselves. As far as Beckman goes, obviously we're going to need to see more from him, but based on the crew he's on, the person he keeps company with, and how the government and Navy have described him, he's supposed to be good enough to at least be in the top 30 like this. So next up, 25 to 20. So next up, 25 to 21. At 25, we have Ryuma, 24, Shiki, 23, Gaban, 22, Kizaru, 21, Odin. Ryuma might be an interesting one just because he is the sword god, but I think as far as how powers have grown over time, I wouldn't necessarily say he's the absolute strongest there's ever been. Now, he is crazy strong, which is why he's in the top 3 of all time in the first place, but I think there are a lot of other people that could take him out. And I think some of his feats are able to be replicated by people of this time. I would say the biggest thing he has on his back is creating a black blade, which is something we've only seen one other character do. But considering that Oda really hasn't done a whole lot in the ways of swordsmanship, I don't know how well that carries into the rest of this, where you have Devil Fruits, where you have Haki, where you have all these other factors that are really strong. And as Kaido says, Haki transcends all. So outside of making a black blade, if Ryuma doesn't really have a whole lot of feats that portray to like Haki or just overall mastery, it kind of hurts him a little bit. He really just has the Tails of Wano. I think the others are pretty self-explanatory. You kind of have like some number 2s here, some number 3s, basically people in a similar bracket. Odin, I think, is here because he didn't really get to live up to his potential. At the time, I would say he was at this level. If he had gotten to get stronger, gotten older, I think he would easily be in probably the top 10. He would be on the levels of like the Yonko, because he was just that crazy. I scale Kizaru to Gaban because I think Gaban's a bit weaker than Rayleigh and have Rayleigh a bit higher up the list. So he's closer to Kizaru. I think that makes sense, but not super far away from Rayleigh. So now let's do our 20 to 16. We got Rayleigh at 20, Dragon at 19, Garling at 18, Shamrock at 17, Loki at 16. Dragon is another one of those characters who is entirely carried on portrayal. Now, we are led to believe that he is incredibly strong, but I feel like there's a lot that leads to him being more of a mastermind, more of a destructive force than it is just like a pure strength thing. However, with the way he's described and the way he's portrayed and the way he's kind of been hidden to us as a character, we kind of have to assume that he is incredibly strong. Otherwise, it kind of doesn't make any sense of how he's been able to carry this entire organization on his back for so long. Especially when you have characters like Kuma following behind you. Kuma's crazy strong. Maybe not like top 30 all time strong, but Kuma is really, really strong. And you have Ivankov and you have like the generals. You have a lot of people that are following under him. And you would assume that he's at least going to be stronger than those people. Now, that doesn't necessarily make him incredibly of all time strong, but that does put something on his name. And if it's to believe that he has a wind Logia or like a weather Logia, which is heavily hinted at, not confirmed, that amps up his power. He could be strong with hockey. There are so many things you could point to with Dragon that lead to him being an incredibly strong combatant. We just haven't seen it yet. So yes, he is here on portrayal and not feats, but I think at this point in time, kind of got to give it to him. I then have Garling and Shamrock here, relatively close to strength. I think that Shamrock probably eclipses Garling, just because Garling had like almost a negative showing as he went on. Shamrock seems to be a bit higher favored, and I think Shamrock might have some better abilities than Garling had available to him at the time. So I'm giving Shamrock that slight edge. And then Loki kind of sits at the top of this bracket. I think Loki has the potential to be much higher. I think Loki has potential to be up in the top 10s. He's just not there yet. He has a lot of growth. He's still technically pretty young, and I think he still has a lot of growth and a lot of time ahead of him. I think he has a lot of experience he needs to acquire, because it doesn't really seem like he's been out there all that much, especially if he's been like chained up at Elbaf, or if he's just been on Elbaf for so long. There's a lot of experience he still has to gain to kind of inform that ability. He already has like the crazy strength, the abilities. He just hasn't used it as much as some of these other people. Now let's do 15 to 11. At 15, we have Luffy. 14, Blackbeard. 13, Aokiji. 12, Akainu. 11, Sengoku. A lot of admirals here. A lot of admirals, a lot of marines in this general area. In general, I think that the pirates tend to edge out the admirals or like the marines in strength. I think that's just the way the story has been written. That's kind of what Oda's perceiving, that the pirates, because they don't have that moral obligation to be good or to be just, they are very selfish, which means they claw and they thrive for power. That is their thing, so they're always going to end up a bit stronger than the admirals, who are kind of following rules that are given to them. I don't want to say they're subservient, but I mean, in a way, they do serve other people. They're not doing things necessarily for themselves, they're doing things for others. Whether it be good, whether it be bad, whether it be just or immoral, they are under someone else's wing, which means they kind of nerf themselves. And I say nerf with quotations because I don't mean like strength nerf, I mean like they don't go after true potential because their goals are aligned with someone else's, not their own. Which is why you have people like Aokiji who leave the Marines, where it's like, okay, I've reached the ceiling of what I can do in the Marines. There's not much more I can do here. And Luffy and Blackbeard are also here because I think while they are upcoming, as far as it goes, I think Luffy and Blackbeard still have some time before they're the top powerhouses they can be. I think their potential has yet to be reached. More for Blackbeard, I think his has yet to be shown. I think Luffy's has yet to be reached, if that makes sense. Blackbeard, I will say, probably has potential to be a bit higher on the list, but unless he suddenly turns good at combat, I don't really see him getting much higher. I don't see him breaking top 10s. Like, he has Hex Delphryd abilities, yes. He's a genius when it comes to things that aren't fighting, yes. But every time Blackbeard is in combat, I'm annoyed because he's bad at it. He's so bad at fighting. If he didn't have like his Devil Fruits, that's why he was sitting on Whitebeard's ship for 4 years, because he couldn't fight. And I guess you can make the argument that he did scar Shanks and that Shanks wasn't off guard. Where's that Blackbeard at? Because I haven't seen him in any of these other fights. And maybe it's because of what Whitebeard said, where he's like, you've become too reliant on like Devil Fruits. Like you got this ability and you kind of became too reliant on that ability. And maybe he's let go of some of his past combatant skills. I don't know. All I see now is that he sucks at fighting. Now, I do have Sengoku over the new admirals just because there was an era of Marines that were just insane. Where you look at, Sengoku, you look at Garp, they were just top-notch powerhouses where they were clashing out with Roger and Whitebeard, Big Mom. So that's another level of power that I've yet to see the new admirals reach. I think they are basically a tier below Yonkos, where it's like Yonko and then it's like admirals. I would say like the likes of Sengoku and Garp sit in the middle of that for the most part. I think Garp may be a little bit higher, but we'll get to that. Now for the 10 to 6, we have the Gorosei at 10, Mihawk at 9, Shanks at 8, Big Mom at 7, Kaido at 6. I have the Gorosei group together because I look at the Gorosei like I look at the Delightful Children from Codename Kids Next Door, where like they move as a pack and they do things as a pack. There's not a whole lot of solo stuff. I think if I were to single one of them out, it would probably be Nosturo. He seems like the most active combatant out of all of them. Whereas when all the others had transformed, they were kind of using the abilities of their fruit or their power. Nosturo was just speedless and people with a sword. Like he was just, his top half was just Nosturo. So it seems like he has more combative ability as a person himself than to be reliant on whatever power he is gifted from Imu and or whatever. But in general, I'd say they're all probably around the same level, and I don't want to waste space just ranking them all. But I do think that because of the Imu power attacks, because of their mythical attacks, their normal combatant skills, they probably crack just right at the top 10, right at the top 10. Of course, I have Mihawk and Shanks above them. I have Mihawk just below Shanks. I think Shanks overall is a stronger combatant. I think Mihawk is the better swordsman, but I think Shanks has a better kit overall, where it's like swordsmanship, hockey, combat ability. I think that all he's a prodigy. It's like a prodigy versus a underdog who's working hard to get where they are. Not saying that Shanks didn't work hard, but Shanks was almost born to be a strong combatant, and he hasn't had like the same hard-working experience that you would see any of the other characters take, or at least we haven't seen yet. I also have Big Mom and Kaido here because I think that as far as like strongest characters of all time, I've yet to see characters that have had feats as great as Big Mom and Kaido. I think people constantly sleep on Big Mom and Kaido. People constantly disrespect these two. They are some of the strongest characters that have been introduced in the series thus far, and I've yet to see them be eclipsed. I do not see any character below them, like outside of maybe Luffy, being a character that ends up stronger than them. Not Blackbeard, not Kainu, not Shanks, no, none of them. Not Loki. I think they are on a tier of their own, and they only sit this low just because of some of the monsters that come up next. And speaking of the monsters, let's do the last 5. So we got at 5, Garp. At 4, Roger. 3, Harold. 2, Rocks. 1, Whitebeard. And these are going to be the most controversial because obviously these characters right here kind of share the spotlight, especially with the God Valley flashback of who had true strength. And I want to remind everyone that this list isn't about who is strong relative to each other at the same time. I mean overall strength. Whereas at their peak, how strong were they? Of course, at their peak as far as it's shown in the series. And while Garp had a really good showing, I understand that Garp had that whole scene where he's chasing down Big Mom, Kaido, and Whitebeard. It's pretty obvious that they just don't want to have that fight. Whitebeard made it very apparent a while ago that there's no point in fighting the Marines when it's just going to use up time and resources. They came here to get treasure and get out. A fight with Garp would take forever. They don't want to do that. It's time, it's effort that they don't want to spend, and I think that's understandable. That being said, it does a great showing for Garp that he can walk up to these 3 and not have any fear. And in general, that's why I have him above Kaido and Big Mom, because even though they weren't in their peak, I think Garp probably beats those 2 easily. Maybe not easily, it's probably a mid-diff. I think Garp wins that. I think Garp struggles with Whitebeard, which is why Whitebeard is sitting up higher on the list. Now, Roger had a pretty decent showing, but honestly, the main reason that he sits in this list is because of his King of the Pirates title and because he was said to clash with Whitebeard and Garp on numerous occasions. Portrayal-wise, like what we see in the manga, he doesn't seem as strong as the world makes him appear. I'm not saying he's weak, but all the other characters on this top 5 right here have, I think, better strength feats than Roger ever really does, which is kind of crazy for the King of the Pirates, but I think that's also the point, is that he wasn't the king because he was the strongest. He was the king because he circumnavigated the globe. He learned the true history. He figured out what was going on in the world. Like he reached that level, that title, because of accomplishments, not because of power. And if I recall, it's even been confirmed that Whitebeard was called the strongest man in the world during Roger's era, or at least when Roger was alive. So that's enough to say that Whitebeard was just a different monster on a physical level. And that's why I have him sitting above Rox and Harold, because I think even in the God Valley flashback, where I would say that's Rox's going to be peak, because we don't see any more after that. He clashes with Whitebeard, and Whitebeard's really the only one that kind of holds that clash. Now, when it comes to Garp and Roger, they're of course fighting together. They're still kind of getting tossed around, and there's no real indication of what happened to Whitebeard. Obviously, like the clash ended and Rox went on his way, Whitebeard went on his way. But as far as like being able to parry something, Whitebeard showed really good offensive capabilities that the other two didn't necessarily show. And Harold sits up above here because he was able to clash with Rox at a relatively equal level. And Harold was, I would almost say, like constantly holding back, especially when it came to Rox, because he considered him a friend. And you could say they're both holding back. I think that's fair. I think Rox has the slight edge just because Rox is a bit more combative than Harold is. If Harold had continued on his path where he was when he was young, where he was incredibly violent, I think he would be stronger than Rox. He might even be stronger than Whitebeard because his tendencies, his combat experience would just be a lot different. But because he kind of subdued himself, I think he took a path where he didn't reach the peak of his potential strength. And Whitebeard sits at number 1 because he is often described as just the physical power monster. I don't think there's ever been a showing where Whitebeard wasn't that monster. Even in Marineford, when he's old, he's sick, he's got 2 heart attacks, a hole in his chest, he is still a monster. People are still terrified of him. Sengoku's still looking at him like, how are you this strong when you don't have a head? And Whitebeard's like, all right, let's go. Let's get it started. I want people to remember that at Marineford, Whitebeard with half a head took Akaino out for like 2 chapters, went over to fight Blackbeard, beat Blackbeard, had to get jumped, gave a speech, and then died of natural causes. Prime Whitebeard, Prime Beard, a different monster entirely. And I feel like there's still some people that doubt how crazy Whitebeard was. That's just his thing. Whitebeard was the physically strongest. Now, he elected not to really go after the One Piece. He elected not to do a lot of things because that's just not what he wanted. So he had all this strength, and I think the reason why people are somewhat wishy-washy on him being top 1 is because he didn't decide to do some things that the others would. Like, he didn't have the ambition that Roger had, or that even Rox had. His goal was to kind of, I won't say live a peaceful life, but he wanted to live a life of adventure and family. That's what he wanted. Everything else was kind of just a plus. So if it wasn't part of the adventure and the family, he wasn't really about it. If he truly wanted to, he could have gotten the One Piece. No one was going to stop him. Big Mom, Kaido, they both mentioned that Whitebeard was the one. So I feel like he earns this spot up here. And in the future, we might see some characters try and like claim that throne. I think it's going to be really hard with the way Whitebeard's been set up, but I'll keep an open mind. That is the top 30. I imagine there's disagreements. I imagine there's agreements. Don't forget to leave a comment down below. I will catch you in the next one. Peace.